leaves his mail, it's gonna leave him alive. And you're a great executive.
Oh, it,
Before that,
it can open up an awful lot of doors.
yeah.
Yeah, but I enlisted. And then when I got out of, when I got out of electronics school, because my grades were good, they gave me a choice of where I wanted to go, and I picked the East Coast instead of the West Coast. To the people of the West Coast, that's where they, but I ended up in Kathy High School, Garden Spot.
I was just telling Trevor, I realized it's wrong. Madam Clerk, are we clear?
Yes.
All righty. We'll call this meeting to order. Good evening, everybody. We'll begin the evening with public comment, if there's anybody that wishes to speak. Okay, seeing none. Moving on to updates from council, if there are any.
I will have couple of updates next Monday about transportation, roads, and that kind of thing.
Okay. Any other updates?
And yeah, that's all.
Okay. All good.
Comment on the excellent program that you did for Veterans Day. I really enjoyed that. Great job by staff and everyone involved.
Good crowd.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. They
Loved
did do
the
really well.
speaker. Yeah, that was packed.
Absolutely. They did a good job. And
Yeah.
Sheila and Bob were both there, so thank y'all for being there. And give kudos to Greg. Yeah.
I'll pass that on.
Any other updates? All righty, moving on to the consent agenda. Any questions about that item? All righty, and we're going to switch item 4 and item 5, since we have our candidate here, one of our candidates. But before I allow him to speak, I just wanted to mention to council, if you recall, when we filled District 2 seat, we did the nomination and ballot method, in which you all got a ballot and you voted on the ballot. I was just going to mention, if we do it that way, I don't get a vote in the matter, which is fine. However, if it does end up being a split vote, I might ask, unless somebody wants to change their vote, but if there ends up being a split vote, I was going to ask that we do a motion and vote as we typically would for any other item so that I could break the tie. But that may or may not be necessary, but I just want to mention that. Is everybody clear about how that works? Okay. With that being said, Mr. Horn, you're here. Thank you for being here. You're one of 2 applicants. If you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you want to serve and anything else that you might find relevant, that'd be helpful, and then we'll field questions from council if there are any.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. My name is Zach Horn, co-founder of Blue Ghost Brewing here in Fletcher. Back in March of 2016, my family moved here from Memphis, actually, and just fell in love with this area. And moved to Fletcher and have stayed there since we moved here. Got involved right away. I was on the Fletcher Parks and Recreation Board for a couple of years right after we moved here. The job responsibilities kind of took my time away from that. But then served as the Fletcher representative to the Henderson County Tourism Development Authority for 5 years, from 2017 to 2022. As far as applying on the position, when Mr. Davey announced that he was stepping down from the extra year of his term, Mr. Blakely and Mr. Davey both encouraged me to apply, and I debated it for several months, honestly, and only decided a couple weeks ago when I was at my daughter's K-Kids induction, which is a branch of the Kiwanis Club, where they really encourage after-school activity and volunteering and working at nursing homes and things like that. As I was watching her walk across the stage for induction, she kind of re-inspired me to go ahead and apply for this position, because I would like to inspire her and her brother in the same way that she inspired me that day by serving in the community actively again beyond her business, but in other ways that this position will allow, different than I've ever had the opportunity to do before. So because of that, I'm applying for the position, and happy to answer any questions that you have for me.
Questions, comments?
You said earlier that, Charlie Turner, you know, earlier you didn't have time to do it, so it wasn't good timing for you to be on the board for the Parks and Recs and stuff. You've got ample time now for 2 Mondays and a
Yeah,
couple of days here in between.
While I was considering the position, I asked Mr. Davy to talk with me, and we had a nice long conversation and got into the specifics of that. At that time, when I was doing the Fletcher Parks Board, I was working for Austin Blues, actually, and they had, with their rapid growth, I was thankful enough to get promoted too, but it also changed my job responsibilities significantly. And it just became very difficult because we were going around the clock. So like I kept having to miss meetings, and it just didn't feel appropriate to keep serving at that time. Situation's a lot different now, so I definitely have time, as evidenced by the 5 years I spent on the TDA board without issue.
And you're the boss, you can kind of schedule yourself out.
Exactly.
That helps.
And actually, your business isn't open on Monday, but you probably do some brewing and stuff on
Yeah,
Monday?
we're there most of the day. We actually have a TDA event happening at the brewery right now. But usually on Monday and Tuesdays, we're closed and have a very flexible schedule. So that time commitment is not an issue like it was back then.
Cool.
And you must have some decent employees that you trust, because I've been in there numerous times, and you've not been there, so.
Thankfully, yeah. No, we've had some great members of even the Fletcher community. We have a lot of members that live in the neighborhoods right around town here. And yeah, I mean, we immediately, I just feel like when we interview them, I feel like we hire good people, but if I don't feel like I can trust them, then we don't hire them. So.
Trevor, did you have a question?
I was just gonna say, how long you been a small business owner? I might have missed it right here.
We started.
8 years ago? I just not seen it,
in
okay.
2016, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about how you might, or how you feel that your business and board service may translate to supporting the town?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously with the Blue Ghost, we are constantly reaching out to different organizations, different groups, different businesses, different nonprofits. So we've been able to form a lot of connections through that experience over the years and work with a lot of different individuals. So that's great as far as that goes. I mean, our employees that are members of the town. And then the board, you know, as far as the TDA board, has a little bigger picture since that was all of Henderson County as well. So it has further reach out as far as who you got to know and who you got to meet. So I think a lot of it comes down to, you know, community connections as far as when you get a chance to work with someone or do something for the town, those type of things. You never know how they'll come into benefit for you until the situation arises. So I think those experiences will really help out.
Sure.
After working with that department through the county, have you identified things that you think that we can do better, or things that are on your mind that you feel like are an issue? And what do you think are things that we are doing currently correct?
Yeah, that's a good question. Tough question. There are definitely things as far as a lot of different things. You know, obviously a lot of growth, a lot of changes in the area. I think it's great as far as that board is related to tourism. Tourism provides a lot of opportunities for locals that we wouldn't have otherwise. I mean, just for example, like Blue Ghost might not exist if there wasn't a tourism industry in the area. So like that's positive for members here, but how do you control and not let tourism be like so overwhelming that it interferes with the locals and residents here. And I don't know if I have any, you know, strong opinions one way or another as far as that goes at the moment. But I think there's a way to do things that can be of benefit to locals in the community, do those type of things. I mean, the Coosta Trail is one of the things that we really sponsored, and it's the type of project that I was wholeheartedly behind because it's such a win-win for not only tourism, but also the people that live here, you know. Love to take my children on a nice long bike ride and close to home and not have to go, you know, to South Carolina, for example, to do that or something like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kind of spinning off that same question, what is your vision of Fletcher in the future that you would bring?
Yeah, I think Fletcher, I thought, going back on that board, one of the projects they talked about at one point and hasn't developed was a rail system that ran from southern Henderson County, Flat Rock, up into Asheville, and how you could just jump on for the day and ride to Asheville and then ride back. Obviously, nothing ever happened with that, as far as I know. But in thinking about that project, it was really cool to think about Fletcher in terms of usually a downtown is formed, is already formed before you get there. And it's such an opportunity here that you can kind of create your own vision from the start. I know there's been challenges with that, but it also is a lot of opportunity in that, you know, we can create things that we really want here in town, or those kind of opportunities. It's like, well, how cool is it to retroactively, thinking about that project, like build a train station that we could walk or drive to ride down to Hendersonville or Asheville or something like that. Like, it's just kind of a cool idea, like stepping back in time in a way, and being able to create your own community with this kind of blank slate we have around us right now.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I think, I thank you for being here, Zach, and appreciate your time, and thank you for applying.
Yeah.
And we'll make a decision next week. Council's ready to make that decision. So next Monday, we'll make that decision. I think you're going to be out of town, though, if I remember that
I
correctly.
can't be here next week. We're making a trip to visit my parents' family, or my wife's family. And it's been close to 2 years since we've been up there, so it
Yeah.
wouldn't have gone well if I had to cancel that trip. So
I don't think you should. Enjoy your time with your family.
Yeah.
And again, thank you for applying.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, now we're going to move back up. Next week, we'll have the public hearing to discuss the potential amendments to the Land Development Code. But Mr. Roof is here this evening. He'll talk a little bit about what we have.
Yes, sir. Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to be here tonight to kind of give a fairly broad overview of the items that we'll be considering in public hearing next week. We've talked about a couple of these in months prior, is just to kind of go back over. The first, or item A, or well, sorry, the first bullet point on the agenda for campers and RVs. We are revisiting that from a few months ago. Initially, Planning Board had made a recommendation where our current ordinance stipulates that folks can only occupy a camper or an RV on a residential lot up to 30 days at a time. And there was some, clarity needed in the ordinance as to whether or not it was intended. The ordinance says that 30-day period can occur 4 times a calendar year. There was never any clarity on whether those 4 30-day periods could run consecutively. So Planning Board had initially made their recommendation to state that the intent was not to allow those 30-day periods to run consecutively. We got to public hearing with council on a few other items, including that one, and council hit the pause button on that one, saying we'd like to have further discussion. The subject of, staying seasonally came up, the subject of hardship, which is a very difficult thing to sort through and figure out who's going to be the judge of that. But we took it back to Planning Board to figure out whether they could come up with an alternative recommendation to consider in addition, that you could consider either next week. But what they came up with as an alternative option, factoring in that seasonal discussion or the hardship aspect, was they came up with the recommendation of a single 90-day period maximum in a calendar year that could run, for a solid 90-day period. there was a little bit of logistics in figuring, okay, what if someone came, like October or November, December, and then, would they be able to stay as they crossed over into a next calendar year, January, February, March? So they did state a desire to see, in a situation like that, where if that 90-day period ended at one calendar year, that there be at least a 30-day interval between when the next 90-day period could start. So took a little bit of figuring out how to word that exactly, but that's the recommendation that has come back from Planning Board. And again, if council discusses it next week and wants to go back to the original recommendation that the Planning Board made, that it would be as well, but this was another option that they came.
So does this totally replace the other method? In other words, if you have, let's say you have a relative that has an RV, and they come and visit you 5 times a year and stay for a week, is that still going to be allowed or not?
Again, it gets into, it's a very difficult thing. I think the main intent here is focusing on those long-term stays. Ultimately, it's building code that dictates that a camper or RV is not intended for long-term occupancy. We've never really had any discussion on these short stays. Often, since we're complaint-driven, and we honestly get, maybe 1 or 2 complaints a year, if that, on this, I don't think anybody's likely to complain about a very short interval. It's tough to cover every scenario under an ordinance like this.
So this doesn't put a specific cap on the short term, it just puts a cap on the long term?
But basically, the idea is to cover this long-term occupancy discussion.
Thank you.
It's kind of become an occasional sore spot in some areas. That you see that.
Is there anything built in this if somebody's building a home and they're having to stay in a camper
There's
type of
already
thing?
there is a separate regulation that's not changing, where if you are, if you may locate an RV and a camper and occupy it on a vacant lot, where you're under active zoning and building permits for the construction of a home. That's not proposed to change.
Okay.
This is just basically about occupying on that kind of, up to a longer term. It was the intent, basically keep people from moving in permanently into an RV in their mom's backyard or something of that nature, so.
And this wouldn't affect like the property up there off of 25 that we allowed them to bring in a couple campers? Because
Different
we...
situation, because that was specifically a campground use
Right.
that got conditionally approved.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, I know it's hard to come up with every scenario, but what if there's multiple owners to a piece of property, and each owner stays a month or 2 months or something like that, to where there's, would it be conditional to that piece of property being, with the days attached to it?
We can only look at it, it's like, it's like there's a house with an address, and they've got that, and it's on a piece of property, one parcel. And let's just say they own the next door piece of property that has a house on it. It's hard to capture every what-if scenario. I can just say that by the statistics of it, don't point to that, and we can always revisit this if it becomes a more chronic situation. Again, I go back to the days when we had nothing on this ordinance section, and we'd get the occasional complaint where we really couldn't address it with anybody. We try and refer folks to the county building department, because I knew that it was a building code issue. They would always punt that back to Fletcher. So
I just figured somebody'd have their in-laws, different in-laws show up at different periods of time, or something to that. And I know you can't come up with every situation, but
again, this is more intended for the longer term, and,
Yeah.
if we see a chronic issue where, somebody asked me, could they we don't really regulate short-term rentals like Airbnbs. I have told people that no, a camper's not intended to be an Airbnb, because they couldn't just park it there and have people coming in and out, constantly doing that. So even though that's not codified, that's just kind of defeats the purpose of the whole clamping down on the long-term occupancy. Doesn't matter who occupies it, just.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any other questions? I can move on to the next bullet point.
I think we're ready to move on to the next one. Thank you.
And we took back to the planning board at your request, got into the subject of street widths for new developments. So in my mind, and planning board ultimately recommended this, we discussed a fairly simple amendment. You know, there was concern expressed about developments with very narrow streets that just frankly don't have room to accommodate on-street parking. There is and a lot of our code sort of stems from, DOT standards and whatnot. I put the entire section in the code on street types in your packet, even though we're really only talking about one section. But I just wanted you to see the whole sort of menu of street choices that have been in our code. They start from all the way up from, Major Boulevard, which we haven't seen any new major boulevards, constructed in Fletcher, but it works its way down to, avenues, main streets, residential main streets, local streets, and you get to a category called minor street that's on page 12-7 in the packet materials. You'll see the one H, minor street. Basically, that is the one that's oftentimes the sore spot in some of these new developments. Now, it does come from, there is a DOT approved, in their manual, there is a DOT street that allows for an 18 to 24 foot paving width. That is what a lot of the developers have chosen over the years. The simplest amendment to address the concerns that this council brought up would be to simply eliminate that choice. The next one up from that is a 26-foot wide paving width that you can see from the illustration. It's to a point where you can accommodate parking on one side of the street and it goes up from there. We didn't want to go as radical as to propose eliminating, where there was an opportunity for parking on both sides of the streets, because that would bring it up to something like a 32-foot wide. Talked with Public Works about this. Jello said just on the disadvantage side of this is when it comes time for street maintenance, repaving, you're essentially paying to repave their on-street parking because it's not a travel lane, but it becomes part of the public right-of-way and everything. So after a discussion with planning board, they felt just the recommendation to put forward would be to eliminate that H option of minor street. I sort of floated this idea. In theory, we could allow it to remain in the ordinance as an option, but potentially consider to say to developers that if that choice is chosen, we're not necessarily going to take it over, accept it as a town street in the future. I don't know how much value I see in that necessarily, because ultimately, if there's questions about people parking on the street, they're still going to call it town. I've had to explain to folks over the years that, sometimes that kind of internal parking is kind of up to an HOA or something, and because being a small town, our police department doesn't necessarily have the resources to be out, patrolling and writing simple parking tickets in developments. I know of a development or two that actually police their own development and write their own tickets internally. So, but long story short is we brought this back to you recommending that one street choice be removed. And that could be a time will tell situation on how developers in the future balk or don't balk at that. That being said, I'll pause for questions.
Have I just comment one other thing on that, Eric, excuse me. If you gave the developer the option to keep that street in and do a minor street with that width, but not have the town take it over, just a big caveat on that they have a strong HOA that's raising fees to maintain the road. If we ever enter into that situation, the reason being, that's usually like one of the most important things. If you have private roads, meaning they're not town maintained, that you have some mechanism to maintain the road in there, if they were given that option for them to remain private.
one of the developments currently undergoing on Rutledge Road, I believe, is, I think that developer's already expressed an intent not to request road takeover. That time will tell, and we'll see if that holds.
It's,
Well, how wide are those? How wide were those?
Those, again, this is for the future, those
Right.
road widths are not 26 feet wide, so it could be the same issue.
They're
Now, a lot
not.
of developers come to us, say by covenant, they're not gonna allow parking on the street. It's just the problem has been that, then they expect parking enforcement by the town, and.
That
I
just
mean-
doesn't work out for us.
Yeah, well, and it's not, we're not unique. It's like, you go to any, Asheville, Hendersonville, and oftentimes you're driving in some of these older neighborhoods where there's cars parked on both sides of the streets, and you really
Right.
only got one lane for travel, and you can see a car coming 100 yards down the road and know it's a game of chicken. Somebody's gonna have to pull over to let the
Yep.
others through. So this is kind of a universal problem, and it's just kind of, being as small as we are, it's like we can put a magnifying glass on it, and, Asheville or Hendersonville, I don't think is writing parking tickets on those streets, because you see it every day. You go down there, it's just kind of a fact of life. Now, you get in a subdivision, and everybody's scrutinizing things a lot more closely.
Absolutely.
And asking why we're not out there writing parking tickets. It's like, well, we don't have a parking enforcement division.
Yeah.
So, but that was the recommendation, and I'll go back over this, obviously, in public hearing next week, but wanted to go over it tonight in case, there's any questions you had for me tonight.
This is what's, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. How's that going to affect the current ones that's under construction in the town?
Again, this is all for ordinances going forward. Nothing will apply. Any amendments made now won't apply to developments already reviewed and approved.
And how's it going to affect, like, the property owners that have lots of land, they have to cut a road? Because right now, if somebody's got multiple acres of land, they have to make a subdivision road to get their family or kids in there. They have to follow the 26. That's the reason why there's two developments in Rutledge Road, because people had to sell land there because they could not get their two kids back there.
I mean, you raise good points.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's like you're requiring wider paving, wider rights-of-way.
Yeah.
You're going to have developers grumble about, this is why we can't have affordable housing. I take those complaints with a grain of salt, because those developers aren't truly concerned about affordable housing.
Right.
I'm not talking about developers, I'm talking about residents here.
Well-
If they got like 3, 4 acres, because right now, if they got to put their kids back there, they got to put a subdivision road standards up
This would
there.
largely apply to large, major subdivisions, which I guess by our own standards, it's like 5 lots or more starts getting into where you require, some kind of basic street in, and then a T-turnaround or cul-de-sac at least.
Well, right now it reads, if you can't share no more than 2 houses on the same driveway.
Yeah,
So that's the reason why they sold that
2
property up there, and that's why we got 2 developments going in.
Yeah, 3 and 4 lot subdivisions are required to have at least that bare bones minimum, and understand it's gonna stay
Yeah.
at probably that 18 to 24 foot wide strip. That's spelled out in the street access requirements.
So if you take away that right there, what's going to happen? They got to do a 26?
I don't think, that won't affect things for those 3 and 4 lot little minor subdivisions like we're talking about. This is more for PRDs or planned residential developments, like.
So basically, you can basically leave it like this for these smaller, if they got to get 3 or 4 houses on a piece of property, what you're saying?
Well, yeah, there are rules that dictate you can't necessarily do 3 or 4 houses on a single piece of property. That gets into some different ordinance
Or
sections.
lots?
But yeah, little minor
Yeah.
subdivisions, so, those are situations where we're not likely to take over those little roads created with,
Yeah, little lots, like say a family and stuff like that. Because I was trying to curious how that's going to affect the families that have like 3 to 5, 6, whatever acres. Because right now, seem like we're putting a lot of pushback on the families to, hey, we don't want your kids here, but we want your your property to be sold so we can develop it.
Again, when you have 3 or 4 acres like that, and that sets up, depending on the zoning, sets up possibility for something like 8 to 12 units or something, it is gonna affect them. I mean, but again, that's where, it's one of those, where is the line drawn? And, we've got that range of street widths, and the concern that arose, that sometimes a concern, it's the first thread on a sweater, you start pulling it, and then you can see how it effect of
Right, I can see about a large development, but I was just talking about residents and stuff. It seems like we're pushing our residents out, trying to get more development. And it seems like there's a little bit of different standards too. If you're a resident, you kind of got some different standards versus the ordinance. So like, for example, street lighting. Is street lighting going in these new developments going in Rutledge Road?
Yeah, that's a different section, but yeah, I can't quote the lighting section.
Because it says right there before, like if somebody's going to put 5 more houses, you got to put street lighting, if it's a residence. But if it's going to be a developer, it seems like there's 2 different standards. Now, I don't see no street lightings on no plans going to these new developments.
Right.
So why is it for 5 or more lots for somebody that has a house, has to have street lights, but a developer could put 9 in,
Correct.
and there's no street lights?
That's just the threshold that got established when the ordinance went in for what was going to be the dividing line between minor and major subdivisions. So if we really want to hit the pause button
Yeah.
and pick this apart.
I just kind of use that as an example.
Yeah, I mean, we could pause this discussion and go back and take a look at the dividing line between minor and major subdivision, you know.
I like that idea.
What's that?
I think that 3 or 4 for a minor is kind of small. I think that it ought to be, have to be larger anyway, and then you could effectively eliminate the road that doesn't have any parking on it and use that for the smaller developments, but 3 or 4 houses doesn't seem like a lot. I mean, to make somebody require them to put in on-road parking.
Right, if you got like 5 or 6 houses, almost like if you're a small residence, if they're a family, I say like, who am I looking at here? I'm looking at Charles out here, he's got, how many girls? You got 3 or 4 girls? If you got a house out there, you want to put them, let them stay on your property, he has to put a subdivision standard road in there, it's going to cost him thousands of dollars, and we're making it harder now by going to 26 feet with parking only for his family, so it's kind of like, you know, we're doing so many things so we can force him out to do a development, it's almost getting to the point of unconstitutional.
Well, again, we took this back to planning board based on the concerns that arose that night, and so if there's additional to it,
Yeah.
now just standing here thinking, you know, on a very quick level, one option to do is, if you want to think about it, you know, we could leave this category in. You know, there is an approach to pause the whole thing and go back and really delve into like what's going to be that dividing line between minor and major subdivisions. Or if you think about that, just the street aspect alone, with that dividing line between when you force the on-street parking, we could leave that choice in, but add some text to that just says this choice shall only be acceptable in,
Major subdivisions.
well.
In minor
No,
subdivisions.
in the minor subdivisions of X number of units or less, you know, like if, let's just say 12 is the magic number, or, you know, to say that a minor street of 18 to 24 feet is not going to be allowed in a subdivision of more than, you know,
I think there needs to be, personally, I think there needs to be more verbiage on that, because, yeah, we got large subdivisions and reasons why, because people get pushed out, because they can't afford to put a subdivision road in.
you definitely see that point.
Have you, something to think about, maybe we should change our ordinances, you know, you've got formulas for figuring out the number of parking spaces that are needed for a particular unit. Should we consider changing it so that interior garages do not count towards that parking limit, to make sure that at least they have a driveway? If they're going to need 3 cars, the driveway has to be big enough for 3 cars, because, you know, the biggest problem we have is when people use their garage for something other than an automobile.
No, I get that point too. We frequently get told that our off-street parking requirements is more onerous than a lot of other places. Like, we already require the 1 space per bedroom. So if you have a 2-car garage and then a 2-car driveway, and you then eliminate that garage, you're then going to be talking about a lot more impervious concrete or, you know, driveway surface. And it's going to.
But if that's what it takes to fix the problem, I mean, when you end up with a development that the fire trucks can't get down the roads because people are parking, that's not a solution either.
I've not seen a situation where fire trucks have not gotten down the roads. And back in the day when we had our own in-house fire marshal, you know, the fire marshal's office is going to have a role in the review review. They're reviewing these streets. So even the ones where there's chronic problems, the fire
But
department.
I think that development that's up above Preston, if the,
Yeah, that's
if
what I was
the
thinking about.
homeowners association didn't police themselves to keep people off those roads, one car parked there would probably stop a fire truck from going through.
And I'll say I currently have gotten some complaints from folk in Sycamore Cottages about people parking on the side, but we haven't taken over those roads yet.
I mean, I think I see what you're going with. If you can make the lots a little bigger and give the parking areas more, residents having more parking areas on their lot, take them off the road, I think that'd be the solve, the end all on that part.
And I could say Sycamore is a unique animal in the sense that it was pitched to us. It's not a typical, it's not a conventional single-family development. It was always pitched to us from the beginning as a PUD, or PRD, Planned Residential Development. So there was not going to be lot lines except for tax purposes. So that's, it was pitched to us as this, kind of utopian little dream.
Yes,
That
very unique.
it ends up, conditions on the ground obviously don't match the vision that's laid out when they're in front of the boards.
That's it.
presenting.
Boy, we found that out real quick.
That, and that's why we're here talking about an ordinance amendment. I tell developers all the time, if being a small town, if there's something that happens in your development that we don't like, next thing you know, there's gonna be an ordinance amendment to cover it. So, we're really talking, we started with talking about street width, but we're in a lot of other areas. So it's like, I don't know if you want to proceed next week and just, to get this specific thing covered and think about a number that we could attach, like Trevor mentioned about what's a certain threshold for where that minor street can no longer be utilized, to try and think of the small.
I honestly think more verbiage needs to be in there. And I still like Bob's idea about making lots maybe a little bit bigger and having them expand their parking area.
To, the lot size requirements, it gets into the density, and so you don't necessarily, you're gonna hear me in a minute talk about density as well as we get to the tiny.
But density's more the favor for the developer.
Well, it's.
And the more houses they can get on, the more money they make,
By
yeah.
your land use plan ultimately, on the further edges of town, you have the lower density, and we're trying to
Right.
steer density to the center. That property down there is obviously a satellite annexation that got taken in '06. It started out was gonna be phase 2 of the condo complex, hit a recession, developer of that one went bankrupt, so it sat and got bought up.
But we had similar problems there, what's that, Bagwell Mills or whatever, the roads were too narrow, and that was kicked around for a long time.
More dense development in the center of town, or where the zoning allowed those denser developments, and I continue to this day that people need to be aware of what they're moving into. One of those Bagwell Mill developer comes in, this is gonna be perfect for a single professional buying their first house, or a widow, but ultimately, the realtors are gonna sell it to whoever, and then the next thing you know, somebody is buying one of these units that's a family with 5 vehicles, and, so in other words, then you're talking about having to regulate, when they weren't marketing it properly.
And that's why we have to make our decisions based on what's based for the town. We don't work for the developers.
Right, right.
We've been burned so many times by developers and their promises. They say, oh yeah, we're in here to do it this, they're in there to make money and get the hell out.
Right, exactly, no, I don't disagree with that, so, but I'm hearing like, I can't even count all the different sections we're delving into.
Right.
So, as far as next week goes, would you like to continue just with the street width discussion, and then we can,
Well, it's directly affecting the other. If you're taking away on-street parking, then we have to jump into whatever section it takes to address the parking on your own piece of land, because that directly affects, that. I don't think that we ought
I
to
would
just
agree
eliminate
with-
it and just throw it off the board.
Yeah, I say-
Not without an answer to it.
Yeah, I say take it out. I mean, we shouldn't have pushing it, throwing it and pushing it down and everything else. We need more verbiage, I think, for that.
I wouldn't have a problem with striking the minor street unless you classify it specifically for a minor subdivision, as you explained. But then for major subdivisions, it shouldn't even be an option. I think when you leave that option there, they'll take it, and then we're back to square one, trying to monitor and I understand what you're saying, that if you include it into a major subdivision, then we can also include that we don't have to take over the street. But irregardless of that, that subdivision's still going to have some issues.
Sure.
And so I would much rather have the wider street, and the developer can do it or not. And they can say no parking on the street, and it's still going to happen.
Oh, certainly.
So I appreciated the consideration of taking this out, but maybe it should only apply to minor subdivisions and not to major at all. That's what I would propose.
I would think we need to change our minor and major subdivision numbers before we would eliminate it though, because 3 houses on anything over, 3-4 houses is a major?
That needs to be redefined. I mean, you can put a
That's what
family
I'm
of
saying.
4 people in there, and he's got a major subdivision, which is actually just a family of
Yeah.
4
Which
people.
all of a sudden
Just
now they
define the
have
difference
on-street
between the
parking
two.
For 4 houses or
So I
5
think the
houses.
minor is ideal for like
I
a family
think
subdivision.
trying to do all this and have it done by next Monday is not going to, personally, I don't think it's going to happen. You're going to have a lot of discussions around this, because I know we talked about this, would be nice to have some wide streets, but now it's like we're trying to push this thing through without having really a discussion about it.
Without telegraphing too much about what's coming, it's like there were some other items that I'm in the midst of talking with our consulting engineer, McGill Associates, about for another batch of some amendments as it relates to plan review and procedures, some of which may involve ordinance amendments, some just may relate to the procedures and the way we review things. What I'm sensing in this is that this is possibly a multi-month discussion with planning board, and then, bringing back information to you guys, and then, ultimately for like maybe some more substantive changes. So hearing everything tonight, it's like best maybe alter it to just take Article 12 street types out of next week's public hearing and
Okay.
go back and, rather than just piecemeal it and do a little amendment now and then have to change it again later, if everybody's okay with that.
I think that's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
And then, lastly, on the last bullet point, this came up actually, I think Sheila, you mentioned this when we got into the first conversation on campers and RVs. You spotted a little tiny section that references tiny homes. And that sparked a discussion among council to, discuss, hypothetically, where could tiny homes go? And obviously, I was caught by surprise on that discussion that night, had time to process it, and sort of kind of ran my thoughts by planning board. So I'm back in front of you tonight, not so much to bring, they didn't wind up recommending anything. After really thinking about it, thinking about our land use plan, thinking about our zoning code, what I first wanted to do was to show you how, or tell you about how a developer could theoretically bring a request for a tiny home community to Fletcher without having to change anything in the ordinance or the land use plan. Just as a visual, I did put a copy of the zoning map in the packet tonight. So,
Thank you.
it gets to be a very slippery slope. I think just on the very first, inkling of discussion a few months ago, the question was going to be, do we need to change our zoning in any way to accommodate, to say a tiny home development to have, more units on a piece of property, say, like, but take your R1 zoning district, that's that cream colored, very light cream colored thing that consists of South Chase, Wildwood, that whole area where the quarry is, and then yellow is R2. Those are both single-family zoning districts. R1 is a 2-unit per acre zoning. R2 is a 3-unit per acre zoning. That's been very well established by our land use plan and subsequently our zoning code all these years. So it would be a slippery slope to then change your density allowances in those zoning districts, for example, because you'd have to go ultimately and change your land use plan because ultimately you're changing the density. What we've been trying to do, and you'll remember back, some of you, in 2018, when we took some residential uses out of C1 and out of C2 to preserve for commercial development, and we further clarified that we were trying to steer our densities closer to the center of town. We do have the Heart of Fletcher overlay district, And while it wasn't outright rezoned when we put it in about 10 years ago, you'll see on that zoning map in the bottom right-hand corner, that inset map for the Harder Fletcher overlay districts. And within there, you see that green block, that is kind of referred to as the Town Center Housing West Precinct. That in the overlay was envisioned to become, possibly up to 8 units an acre someday. The yellow in that inset map, Town Center Housing East, was envisioned to become up to 16 units per acre at some point. And then the pink area was referred to as the neighborhood business section. That was getting into the possibility of allowing for kind of smaller scale neighborhood level commercial, but also our neighborhood business district as it exists on paper allows residential development up to 16 units per acre. So where I see in our current zoning map and our current overlay district, stuff that's already been planned for, a developer, and again, I'll back up and say I have yet to receive an inquiry from a developer about any kind of specific tiny home community. But if someone came to me today and said, where could I think about doing one of these? I said, well, if you've assembled some of the property and got it under contract in any of those precincts, you can come request a conditional zoning approval from your site plan for a tiny home community, and then it would receive fair consideration through planning board and council. And we would be able to stand with certainty and say that it's consistent with our land use plan, and then subsequently, assuming they do a compliant plan, consistent with our zoning code. Anything beyond that right now gets into really having to rethink some of the land use plan where, you would basically have to rewrite the land use plan to say that you would consider higher densities in those areas that had been previously been intended to keep as lower density. So I'll pause there. So my main point there being is that I don't think, and I think the planning board agreed that we don't necessarily need to make any code changes right now for tiny homes because the opportunity is there.
It's the only place they can put tiny homes will be in that Harder Fletcher district, you're saying? Well, if somebody wants to put a tiny home on, like maybe 2 tiny homes on, say, an acre, or instead of 16 tiny homes an acre, wow, that's the tight.
Technically, the orange where you see way out there,
Yeah.
like Livingston Farms, that's R3. And then there's another little sliver of orange. Technically, that R3 also allows up to 8, I think it's 10 units an acre of multifamily development. At the time in 2015, we did that rezoning, the idea was we largely got rid of a lot of the R3 off the map at the time because that was a reaction to when we did our land use plan update to get the Hoopers Creek area rezoned for low density to match up with the original land use plan. So, a developer could come to us on a big property in R2 now, or R1 now, and say, I want to do tiny homes, and it would have to match the same density.
As long as it matches the same density.
Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking, like, say, for, I don't know, Keith, he does tiny homes, can he still put it in there as long as it matches the same density?
Yeah,
Okay.
Keith's property, to use as an example, came to us, it went through, it met the zoning density for, I think you were,
He's in the green.
you were in.
Aren't you?
Yeah, you're in the green right
I'm in
there.
the yellow technically,
I mean, you
but
can put-
Harder Fletcher, I am in the
Keith
green.
met the
8.
density for R1, which was 2 units per acre standard, so, that's, if Keith had put together with his engineer a plan that speculated on that higher density allowed by the overlay district, he could have put together a conditional zoning to try and do more, and still do that if you're wildly successful and want to add units down the road, it would just be like another process.
So that they can have tiny homes throughout the town of Fletcher as long as they meet the density.
That's
Okay.
correct,
All right.
yeah, we don't dictate size of house. There may get into some building code standards that say, well, you gotta do X, Y, Z, but we pretty much say that if you can get a building permit for it, do zoning permit as long as it matches.
Can you define tiny homes? Is it something, there are several ones that can build on the site, there are several ones that's got pulled by a trailer, is that, what are we defining as tiny homes?
Tiny homes, and we split it into 2 categories. I don't have a square footage threshold to
Okay.
tell you, but we do say that tiny homes on wheels are treated exactly the same as campers and RVs, and so the rules that we're establishing for campers and RVs would apply to a tiny home on wheel.
So if somebody pulled a tiny home on their property, they can't use it after 90 days?
Yeah, if it's just one little pull-behind,
Yeah.
correct. So it would be same as our pull-behind fifth-wheel camper.
Well, if it's almost like Bob was saying, somebody stays there a weekend, that's it, every other weekend. And it's not a permanent 90-day stint, so that's what,
We're not going to be roaming the countryside looking for those little quick weekend stays. You know, if it got to be chronic and we started hearing from neighbors complaining, saying somebody's doing it all the time, then we'd be launching it with our inquiry letters.
This is getting more at the permanent tiny homes, not the mobile ones.
So, yeah, we're talking about like tiny, I mean, someone could come in and propose like a community that would consist of tiny homes on wheels.
yeah.
They would have to go through the same standards that were required for campgrounds, similar to like Rutledge Lake RV, which actually predates our code, but more recently, the smaller
Okay,
example up
yep.
here on 25. So that being said, if council was okay with everything going over, we would also not really include the tiny home discussion in the public hearing and just kind of wait for it to become a more pressing issue. There are more ordinance amendments that I'm hoping to get into the planning board about in January, and now, based on that conversation about street types, it may become a multi-month discussion and having to pick apart things like, if I'm understanding right, Bob mentioned parking. I do want to compare some other jurisdictions to figure out exactly how different our residential parking requirements are from some other areas.
But just be careful,
Yeah.
you know. I don't care what other people do, we need to do what fits us.
I agree, 100%.
It really, you get into the whole other realm of like the impervious surface. And
Right,
all
right.
that good stuff. So it is a balance, but I'm hearing, beyond some of the stuff I already had in mind that I haven't gone over with you yet, and I'll hold off for now, is I'm going to be adding in discussion on thresholds for minor subdivisions versus major, and parking requirements for residential. And then we'll fold that back in with street width discussion at a later date.
So the area that you and I looked at down Fanning Bridge Road that I said would make an excellent area for tiny homes, are you telling me that
Well,
it's only 2 per acre?
by like that, I think we were talking about the quarry property, if I remember right? So the quarry is zoned R1, which by current standards is a 2-unit per acre, and it's not part of the overlay district. So that's where it would get, it would be a controversial, like if a developer called me up tomorrow and said, hey, I want to try and get rezoned to do something that will allow me to do a tiny home community with like 8 tiny homes per acre or something, I would say.
Special use
very-
permit?
It would get into a conditional rezoning, and it would be a very controversial one, because I guarantee you, the adjacent Wildwood subdivision would not want that kind of level of density.
But you're telling me
it's
that
not-
South Chase is 2 per acre?
No, South Chase came in before our current zoning, I don't know.
Okay, because I thought that just isn't right.
Or right across the street, St. John Commons are showing in the cream, and they're also not an R1, but they're
No.
that.
There's a lot of grandfathered stuff out there, but the zoning has largely been intact since I've been here. And, a lot of these subdivisions that had finished up in the early years of Fletcher kind of came about as zoning was kind of being implemented. The old zoning code had a slightly different threshold. It might have required slightly smaller lots. Some developers did these cluster subdivisions where the lots were smaller, but again, the land development code that we're under now came in 2006, and that really established that 2-unit per acre, 3-unit per acre, or 4 for R3, and then got into the various thresholds for multifamily that I'm working with right now. But yes.
Well, I'm just saying the very nature of all the development all around that one area. I know you said you felt like there would be, and I don't know a developer now, but I know you've expressed that you think neighbors would complain, but I would beg to differ because their density is so much all the way around that one little spot.
South Chase, I would just guess, standing here in front of you, and I could be wrong, I'm guessing that South Chase, for example, is probably about 3 units an acre. So, I mean, you know, if a
Maybe.
developer came in saying, hey, 4 units an acre for a tiny home, and I'll say never, and you can try and put it together. But it gets into that, you know, these seminars you go to over the years for the zoning certification, blah, blah, blah. The school government guys, I'll tell you everything. The statutes now are getting stronger about everything you approve, like conditional and rezoning. They say has to be compliant or consistent with your land use plan or your comprehensive plan. Otherwise, it effectively, an approval of something that's not becomes an amendment to your plan. So that's like when we had that apartment complex come on Rutledge Road, where one of the single-family developments is being built now. We had to kind of beat the drum loudly to say, hey, approving this would not be consistent with the land use plan, and if you approve it, we're going to tear up the plan and rewrite it to say, yes, we're happy with multifamily, and then it would set a precedent and we'd be overrun.
In that scenario on Fanning Bridge Road, that would be inconsistent with the land use plan right now.
Depends on the density.
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, the concept that was being talked about was probably one of these denser tiny homes. The idea is because they're tiny, you get more people. They're theoretically more affordable, obviously, but, you know, I still haven't met anybody that's lived in one of those for a very long time. Maybe they're perfectly happy, but, you know, so.
Well, there's a whole development, Mills River, they've been there for what now, a couple of years?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's true.
It's actually been a pretty growing thing.
It's
I just don't want to steer people away
special option for
before they
some,
even
not
have
for
option to
everybody.
present a plan.
Yeah.
To me, anything less than like three per acre, basically you're saying, we don't care about trying to move towards affordable housing.
It's.
I mean, nobody in their right mind is gonna put a mini home 2 to an acre. That's not why they built the mini home in the first place.
Correct, yeah.
True.
We are, and I have this discussion with lots of people that call citizens and developers, and we are 6.5 square miles, and we have very little developable land left. Yes, developers will be able to stitch together this and assemble stuff in the future in a scenario that we haven't anticipated yet, but as far as the raw, undevelopable, or undeveloped land, like you're seeing with Rutledge Road now, those were sitting there, our zone R2, ever since before I
Yep.
got here. We always knew those would eventually be moving towards single-family subdivisions. And again, yeah, it's like you go over some of the requirements with them, and then you get grumbled at about, oh, this is why there's no affordable housing. Well, I mean, I can tell you now that the folks developing those Rutledge Road never intended for it to be, quote, affordable housing.
No, but individuals might.
Pardon?
Individuals might. It sounds like we're dictating.
Well, but again, it's like at 6.5 square miles, we're gonna have very little opportunity to solve the region's affordable housing problems, and I don't mean that in any disparaging way. It's just-
This is true, but if we have an opportunity to do anything right, that's what we want to do, because it is so, we need to be intentional with what we do, and you're exactly right, we don't have much to work
And all
with.
we can do is look with blinders on, and the way I've tried to proceed is like looking at us like, no matter what size we are, you know, general planning principles is that you try and steer your lower density on the edge of town, and you try and steer your density to the center of town. You know, when Buncombe County, they're working on their comp plan updates. You know, I got interviewed by someone from there a while back as a stakeholder, you know, since we're right there on the border, and you know, what could we do? I said, well, you could, you know, consider your zoning in a way that doesn't, you know, we hear all the time about apartment complexes on the edge of Buncombe that people think are in Fletcher. I'd say you could try and steer your density closer to the center of the county, but, you know, that's kind of, that toothpaste out of the tube already. So, but
Too late
again,
for that.
Let me ask you another question while we've got this map in front of us. That quarry property, are those light lines, are those the two main parcels, the Lance property and then the quarry property?
Looks like there's 3.
Well, the third one is the Westfelds, so that I
I see what you're saying.
understand.
I just know the one big quarry property, I don't really know the minutia, the ownership.
Because the one behind it is, to the best of my knowledge, is one of the Lance sisters or something, that basically, because of the way they built the interstate, the subdivisions, and the Westfeld property and the quarry, that big piece of property is landlocked.
Correct. And that's.
So I hope when they sell the quarry, they sell that property at the same time.
Yeah.
or build a road into it.
Right, that's why we have a lot of the roads we have now, so you don't end up with large tracts of prime land that's accessible by like a 8-foot private easement or something that you can never get a road through to. So, yeah, that, I see those two properties would largely be dependent on if they went as a bundle with the quarry property.
Who's that?
That's what,
However,
this
long
is
the quarry's
one of the
not
land
closed, I have yet
systems,
to
this is
receive
a
any
quarry.
inquiries whatsoever about it. So, I really don't
No,
know.
that's,
Kind of a shame.
oh, maybe there is
See,
two
this is the
there.
Westfield.
It's like a big black hole out there.
Yeah, that's
It'll
Westville.
fill up
You've
with water
got
slowly.
two-family, these locked-in condos.
That'd be
It appears
nice.
that way.
Yeah.
So basically, if I'm hearing everything right, we're basically coming back next week just to do the first bullet point.
I think so. Yeah.
Reserves, right.
Anything else?
We
No,
appreciate you,
Thank you
Eric.
so much.
Thanks, Eric.
All righty, moving on, item number 6, the ordinance related to amending the town charter for the plurality method of elections. Mr. Manager?
Okay, thank you. This one may seem a little bit redundant now with the Senate bill that's been ratified on October the 25th, but this was basically our last step in the process when we started this the end of September, when you did a resolution of intent at a special call meeting. You did the public hearing then of what the resolution of intent was stating, to consider the change from the primary method to the plurality method for elections. You had the public hearing at the October 9th, and sorry, I had a mistake in the ordinance there. It referenced October 2nd. It was October 9th for the public hearing. We've corrected it, and I emailed it to you. So that was the next step, and then the last step was to consider in November a ordinance that technically amends the charter to go from that nonpartisan primary to nonpartisan plurality method. Our legislators, as you know, were working on this. They did get a bill in. We weren't sure if it was going to get through. So this kind of supplements what they're doing. It's not absolutely necessary, but I'm recommending you do it just as a final step here, I guess, internally, that you've formalized it as a town, even though the General Assembly can go and introduce really any bill to change something locally that's done. So that's essentially it. It just, formalizes our change from that primary to plurality method for the elections. And in the bill, it's December now for the filing, and that was not the wishes of the municipalities on it, and we tried to discuss this with our legislators, and they felt it was in the best interest for, I guess, consistency and efficiency to have one filing period that's the same as the other partisan ones. So, which may lead to another discussion down the line here on taking a position on that, but I think now is probably not quite the best time to do that. So that's essentially it. If you want to, comfortable taking action next week.
I'm comfortable with it. I'll say the one thing I'm disappointed in is the filing that our legislators did, but other than that, that's what we wanted besides that.
Will that be moved to a consent agenda?
You could, yeah. Could move that if you're comfortable.
Are we all right with the consent agenda?
Yeah,
That's fine.
We've already approved it.
Yeah,
put it on
I mean, you've
consent.
discussed this a lot, y'all are on
Yeah.
the same page on this unless something changes.
All right, any more discussion there? All right, moving on. Item number 7, next week we'll have Mr. Jabbo Presley here to recommend some street resurfacing projects for this fiscal year. I think there's 2 streets there, Continuing Drive and Snowball Lane.
Yeah.
And Jabbo will be here next week.
Yeah, and he was out sick, and I just didn't think tonight he was still kind of getting back on his feet here from being pretty sick last week. So, yeah, he looked at 2, I'll let him talk about it more with him and McGill, so Public Works and McGill Associates, our engineering firm, evaluating, they actually evaluated two areas, and it's, based on our analysis and rating of these roads, and we try to do the worst condition to the best condition as we resurface. So they looked at Continuum Drive and Snowball Lane is the recommendation. And then the other area was out in Livingston Farms, North Sunbury Drive, South Sunbury Drive, and Wild Meadow. And felt the Continuum Drive and Snowball were actually in slightly worse condition, and they're ranked worse. Continuum Drive, if you don't know, or for those who aren't familiar, that's off of Old Airport Road. It's a commercial road, really, primarily. It's the road that services Fletcher Commerce Park off of Old Airport Road. It gets a lot of traffic, obviously, with the truck traffic on there. And then Snowball Lane, yeah, that's right on Fanning Bridge. It's on the left as you're heading away from Town Hall. It's before the intersection with Rutledge. It's in rough shape at some of the ends. If you drive down, it's got some ruts in the road. We usually don't see that. We may see the cracking in there. And that one may be a little more challenging than your traditional just go in there and mill it up and resurface it. We may have some subgrade issues, and that's one of the old roads where back in the day, some of the developers would throw the tree debris down in there. This is before we were involved in, regulations on street widths and things like that as subdivision requirements. So we may have some subgrade issues to deal with in there, so it could wind up being a little bit costlier than $175,000 estimate, but I mean, that's still well within our threshold.
And there's not really a cul-de-sac at the end of that, is there?
No, if you drive down, it's not, it's a.
Yeah, turn down somebody's driveway.
Yeah,
back out to
just
get back
about,
out.
yeah, you're just about there's not much room to back around in there, so
How did the town ever take that property, those roads over without cul-de-sacs and stuff?
that happened a long time ago, and I don't know when they took them over. I'd have to research that, but, that was probably back in the day when we incorporated, and my guess is it was never a DOT road. Now, we've got old DOT
I don't know,
roads.
I'm sure it wasn't.
Yeah, that we've taken over, or still in the process of, like in your neighborhood, we got some that we're still looking at the process of doing that. But asking DOT to resurface them again before we do that. So, yeah, it was one of those things, kind of like Eric gave some examples of some things that happened before we had regulations to better address street widths and things, and amount of parking based on units developed, that kind of thing.
Now, Sunflower's real similar to Snowball right there.
Yeah.
But I guess it maybe doesn't have any of the dipping in it, or?
It's
It
not.
obviously wasn't on high priority.
It's not as in bad condition
Yeah.
as Snowball is. But those are the two we're recommending. I've told him to be prepared if he wants to talk about the others and Livingston Farms. And they do, there's some cracking on there, and my guess is next year they would probably move up then into the list for resurfacing. They're not in horrible shape, but they're,
There could be,
That's far.
deterioration.
there could be underground springs in that area too that could cause all that ruts and stuff. Because I know there's
On Snowball.
several places around there
Yeah.
that have had springs.
There could be some water.
And there's a little creek that
washout.
kind of puts right behind those houses.
Yeah.
That was the original phase of Wildwood, and then they built, or the other phases, to the
Okay.
point that if you go down to the county now, there are 5 different sets of covenants that cover the Wildwood subdivision.
Wow. Yeah. So.
Cool.
But unless there's any other questions to me right now, or I'll have Javo prepared, and then once he will go over that, and if you're comfortable with moving forward with those 2 roads, we'll have McGill come back, as we typically do, with a more detailed cost estimate before we go out to bids. Just so you get a better idea what they're looking
Or
at
it's gonna be
cost-wise.
spring by the time they can get to it anyway.
Yeah, we started this 5-6 years ago or so.
Get it approved now.
Yeah, we used to do it much closer to the spring. Well, we did some in the fall. And then, I'm trying to remember how it switched over the spring, but since we were doing the resurfacing in the spring, it makes sense to get that decided in the winter so that when we go to bid, we're trying to get the bids out right when the contractors are getting ready to start resurfacing. So it sometimes helps a little bit more competitive.
And the plants are open.
Yeah, the plants are just opening, and so they're, maybe a little hungrier or more competitive on the bidding. So,
All right, I think we're good.
Okay.
We're good there? All right, we'll move on to item number 8, Mr. Manager, the update on the developer interest in the Town Center project.
okay, thank you. So in your packet, and I've been emailing you about this, there's kind of 3 groups that we're talking to, probably a little more extensively the first 2 that I mentioned in here. So Windsor Built, we've had a months-long discussion and meetings and them analyzing the and I'm talking just the 25 section of the town center property, not the part that surrounds town hall. And then there's been a next group that's been in the midst of this, which is the Carlin Company, which is Brad Goodson, associated with Tinoka Construction. And then the last is kind of just more recently, NAI Beverly Hanks, a representative from there, had contacted Eric and I, wanted to meet to understand a little bit better what the vision, kind of requirements for the town center, what we'd like to see as far as mixed-use development. So we spent time going over that with him. He has a couple national clients that are looking at our property. And I think I mentioned to you previously, it was one more on the residential side, and then the other that does commercial. And it's been, and again, we're not trying to encourage fast food development, but the one does some things with grocery stores, fast food, some other types of commercial. But we wanted him to be very clear what the vision is here for this, and it's not necessarily just to put something down like that quite frankly can happen just organically without the town facilitating a public-private partnership. So those are the 3. I had shared with you that Windsor Built had put that letter of intent in, and had some feedback on it, wanting more details about what types of commercial development they were proposing. And then we asked the Carlin Company to submit something. They did a kind of engagement letter, if you will. Well, it is an engagement letter, and then there's a copy of kind of what their vision, based on what we've explained to them, how they would want to approach the tractor property. So there's a map in here from the Carlin Group, and then like a very preliminary site plan and their engagement letter. And what they're interested is engaging us, and it could be through a letter of intent, over some 4-month period of time to do additional due diligence on the property. So, and I like the way, or at least Eric and I like the way they've articulated doing that in here. I don't know if you all are comfortable. And if you engage them, this isn't like an agreement, like a developer's agreement. This is something much more informal, like a letter of intent, which are usually not binding. But it says, hey, we're working with you. It gives them some credibility to work on site plans, looking at financing, maybe some pro forma on some things. So that's where we are with these 3 parties we've been talking to. In the agenda item here, and in the memo I sent to you, it was a couple options of kind of what do we want to do with them at this point. Do you want to hear from them directly as far as some presentation to council, to hear a little bit more about what they think they can do in their capacity to do it? Or do you want to simply maybe set a deadline to receive a more formal or more descriptive idea of what they propose to do on the property, with some, additional due diligence?
I think it'd be nice if they would come out and do a presentation, and they can hear directly from council some visions and stuff like that, if that makes sense. I mean, like was it Carlin right here, they did pretty decent. I mean, they actually put
I
a
do too.
future park right there, because, that's going to be DOT right away, so it won't really matter with that. That's planning for the future, it's pretty good. But have them come and do a presentation like that, they can hear from us, visions as well. Not saying that they're hearing for y'all as staff, but they probably want to hear actually from the horse's mouth too, of some things that we might can bring to the table.
But we've got to come up with ways to make sure that what they tell us is what they do.
Yes.
Yes.
Otherwise, they'll just go off the deep end.
Yeah, it's like the future one and future two, it don't really show you anything. It'd be nice to know what their thoughts is, and they can hear us some visions and stuff like that. And so that'd be perfect to put right here. Like, for example, fast food, I mean, we don't really need fast food, but local, local restaurants, something like that, commercial, but.
Well, I think it's kind of ironic that the pictures they put in here, first of all, they're both from Apex, and they're very old buildings, but they're building brand-new buildings. It just seems like kind of an odd presentation to me.
Unless they're gonna build it looking like historic.
Retro.
Yeah.
But it could be similar in the fact that they've got restaurants in the bottom and, small commercial upstairs.
So Brad Goodson was the contact with that company, and I imagine that's an LLC. He's mentioning the Carlin Group. Eric and I thought, and he's local, he's been following our project closely. He knows some of the other players that have been involved, like he knows Martin Lewis Real Estate Group, which was part of the group we were contracting with, with the Waddells. So, he kind of knows some of the limitations and some of the things happening and has some decent connections. And not that Windsor Built doesn't either, because they've done other commercial development, and they've been analyzing our project site pretty hard. They've had, Windsor Built's been talking to the railroad. They're exploring this, if stormwater could be diverted under the railroad tracks and back here somewhere. Obviously everybody wants more details on the vision. And I will say also back to Windsor Built, and I just got an email in late today, after I had a long conversation with him based on the feedback from y'all and staff that, hey, we need more details other than just commercial development in there. Yeah, I talked to him about the restaurant thing and some of these others, and always their point they make is, well, you need something under to underwrite the costs, because restaurant might not do that. Well, I said, well, this is also a public-private, or has the potential to be a public-private partnership, because he goes, well, that would require a public-private partnership, which gets into more public investment to kind of make their numbers work. I said, well, that's what we had set up before with, with Waddell's and Lewis Real Estate Group. There was, public contribution for part of the cost of the road, do the demo on the buildings, which the town did, in exchange for they will do this many commercial buildings and, some of the look and the limitations on height and all that. I mean, we would not really set anyone too far loose here if we were getting close to being in agreement of what you're comfortable with and what they're be willing to do without then ultimately getting into the developer agreement, which puts a lot more teeth into this, which took a long time with that negotiation, if you remember before. So I don't know if you want to hear from them directly to talk to y'all here and,
All right,
in the meeting, or giving them a deadline for, and we can work on more of the parameters, what would be in a proposal, but So I want to throw that out, because I feel like there's definite strong interest here, and we want to keep this moving, and there's some competition now, which is good for interest in developing the site.
I'd like to see them come and present to council. That way we can give them feedback too, particularly since we're going to have a new council member
Yeah.
pretty soon. I think that'd be beneficial for them too. I think it would be beneficial for both sides.
Okay.
I'm also curious, well, before we move on, but what does everybody else think about that? Do we want them to come present, or do we want to
I'm
do it
leery
later on?
about giving anybody an extended period of time unless they can convince us pretty good detail what they're gonna do.
I'd like to know what they're going to do. I mean,
We got 3 people that are looking at the same time, we should use that to our advantage.
But yeah, I'd like to
This
see-
is the other thing, and I know, I'm right there with you with those comments, but when they're looking at this and they say, I think we can do restaurant, or we think we can do this retail, or we think we can do financial, when I said financial, I'm talking like banks or investment, that some of the initial feedback I got from Windsorville was medical, financial, and then, the convenience store, which doesn't, I know wasn't our first pick for one of the uses on there. So that's kind of some of the things they're seeing, but when they say that, then they're going out and putting their feelers out there to see what is the likelihood they can get those types of things on there, what might they look like. So that it takes time for them to do that.
And I could live with medical, I could live with financial, as long as the restaurant piece is in there
Yeah,
also. But if they're gonna make it all medical,
Yeah,
I wouldn't support
Right,
that.
right, and that was part of
banks.
Yeah,
They got
I
banks
agree with
everywhere.
that.
Yeah, right. And that was part of the thing I tried to press home with, him, and Carlin Group understands it better, that's the kind of, like a destination entertainment, that's what we're going for, and that's all the feedback we've got from the
That's
public on it.
that's the heart of
to
Fletcher,
support it.
you want
Yeah.
something where,
Downtown.
Right.
a home feel type
Yeah.
thing, where people,
Yeah.
you draw people in.
Yeah.
Drawing people to come to another bank is
Yeah.
not, so like, I really didn't like, I'm not saying nothing bad about them, but we had a gas station on the corner, I mean, that was really, I know why we had it before, but,
Yeah.
the park more, to me, feels like it's more inviting
Yeah.
versus a gas station.
I really, however this ultimately happens, I like that idea, and we even had Jack Cecil several years ago. Eric and I met with them and just, hey, what do you think about that? And he came and met with us and gave his thoughts, and he threw out a thing which doesn't get to where we're going, but he made some valid points, like, well, what about just a whole park area there? And we're like, well, that's nice, but it's prime commercial, we want that to be part of what people are coming in here for. But that, if, like, say the south end, just for the sake of some of the brainstorming there, that could make sense. A little pocket area that, okay, if people are coming to a restaurant or craft beer place or whatever in there, Blue Ghost too, but you know what I mean, if they're coming into a place like that, and you got like an outdoor seating
It's inviting.
area,
The park, hit the park and then walk up here and start doing some shopping
and they can walk
mingle,
around, and it's kind of a nice.
almost like the park.
Yeah, it's a nice amenity there for, like, kids to run around, people hang out, and as they're at a restaurant or something in there, so, but,
I am curious, and you and I kind of talked about this already, but if they do this Future 1, Future 2, Future Park, does it get us over any DOT hurdles that we had before with Lewis Real Estate?
on the park.
Well,
with
with them doing it in phases,
Oh.
does it get us over any of the DOT hurdles?
You
Or not
know,
really?
and it's an excellent question, because, we're trying to look at this holistically as far as the whole tract of land. And I know, like, Carlin Group's looking at it phased, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Our chance can be better sometimes to get a driveway permit to start this, but I think we're gonna get a high level of scrutiny, whether
Still.
we go piecemeal on this, or, I mean, because that was part of our gripe to them, or our, big objection, complaint to DOT was, heck, well, we could have just let someone come in here and do it piece by piece, and then they got their driveway permit from you, and you wouldn't have put all these huge requirements for traffic mitigation things, so, but yes and no.
Yeah.
The other thing we want to try and do on this, and whoever we wind up going with, that hopefully can do it, if it's, whether it's one of these groups or someone else, is more on the front end, as we have the vision of what they're doing, or it's getting articulated fairly specifically, getting DOT to weigh in on it, maybe get some preliminary recommendations, because they'll probably have to do a TIA on here if we do, anything
Sure.
of any major
Of course.
impact again, the traffic impact analysis.
I like the letter from Carlin's,
Yeah.
even though it was much more detailed in the fact that it's reaching out for a partnership as opposed to Windsor, we're offering to buy for commercial property, here it is. And this illustration that they included, to me, it's like they're saying, we see you. They see that what we already have and what they can put up to make it blend, because the bottom line is that it will be a hybrid area if done correctly, because those older buildings on the left side of the road going north, they're not going anywhere, and so this really looks good to me, and it gives you a downtown vibe of a little town, which we are, and it would make me feel like I'm in Brevard or something, where I can enjoy the street, as opposed to doing straight commercial, and medical and financial and convenience. I know that that's probably needful, but man, I'd really like to see some more things that are small business and restaurant use, as well as some of the mixed use up here.
Yep.
But I like the illustrations. It makes you feel like you're in Brevard or Travelers Rest or somewhere where you want to stay and walk around for a little bit.
Downtown feel matches the
Thank you.
buildings.
I'd love to see what else they have in mind with that. And it sounds like more work for us, but I think in the end, you would appreciate that, because whatever you get, I mean, once it's done, and you can't go back and with an eraser and change any of it. So I think it would be worth it to, of course, we'll see what Windsor has to offer, but it might be well worth it to have someone that's so strongly wanting to partner with the town to get it right.
Yep.
That was well said.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you. I guess the consensus is kind of set some meetings up for them to come present?
Yes.
Okay. I'll do that. I'll communicate back with them. Thank you.
All right, any more on that item? All right, we're moving on to your comments, Mr. Manager.
Okay, thank you. So, a couple things here. First, I wanted to talk to you about, so Crown Castle, the company looking at the small cell wireless facilities, they had shared with us the end of September, and we've had a lot of resident interest in this, mostly from residents in Windsor Forest. And so September 27th, we had a face-to-face meeting with representatives of Crown Castle to hear from them about where they were looking at for preliminary sites for these small cell facilities. And they shared that with us. I shared that with you all, that there was about 5 to 7, but really just 2 that were within a subdivision, residential neighborhood type setting, and, one was Franham Acres, Hickory Drive, and Oak Brook, and then the other was one in Windsor Forest, and it was at Red Spruce, which is that main entrance off of Fanning Bridge, and Alder Lane, so it was kind of deep into Windsor Forest. So we then in turn shared back, staff did, to, hey, propose something outside of those neighborhoods because of town's position about trying to move them outside of a residential area like that, that has utilities primarily underground, to maybe another area that, where the utilities are above ground, and to the best of their ability, try and get away from residential. So they came back, and I emailed you this, 2 alternative sites, one out of the Franham Acres and one out of that location in Windsor Forest. And I emailed you, and you got a hard copy of a map on the dais here. And so the alternative for the one out of Franham Acres, which was going to be at Hickory Drive and Oak Brook, was moved to Underwood Road, which it's the yellow pin on here. It gets cut off a little bit there on Underwood Road. So that's the approximate location they were looking at moving the one out of Franham Acres. And, excuse me, kind of course, our neighborhood to the east of it is a neighborhood there, but it's on the edge of a more commercial section here, at least on the west side of the road. So that one, at least my, staff general opinion, is probably not a bad location. The other one then, for the one going out of Windsor Forest, they pinned a location it looks near, it's on Fanning Bridge Road, appears to be near the entrance to Windsor Forest. We've already heard back from a couple residents that do not like that location. That is on a DOT road, not on a town road. And I can't tell if it's across the street from there, or if it's on that north side of Fanning Bridge Road. But, those are our 2 locations, and Crown Castle's trying to keep in constant communication with us and want some feedback of how you all feel about these 2 alternative sites. I know we're already going to have at least 1 or 2 residents that won't like, or more maybe, the location on Fanning Bridge Road. So I'm throwing this out there. They're waiting to hear back from us. They're trying to give the town a lot of feedback or input into this, which they don't have to do, but they want to do to try and make this go as smoothly as possible. And obviously, a lot of this was precipitated by residents being very concerned about, starting in Windsor Forest, one being right there in the middle of the neighborhood where all the utilities are underground. So
I'd like to know the exact location of that yellow pin right here on Fanning Bridge, because if they just bumped it across the street, I don't think that's
I would imagine.
any better than if it was put back at the entrance.
Well, if I remember right, there's, on the southwest corner, there were 2 lots, and they built one house on the west side, and on the east side, there's already a bunch of utility structures on that piece of property. And that's probably where they're talking about putting it. It's right next to those other utilities.
Yeah, like on a pole that's.
They got some stuff on the ground too right there. It's got stuff like transformers on the ground he's talking about.
Probably is.
That's probably
Good
the piece of
observation.
property they're looking
Yeah.
at.
Yeah, I mean, they try and do it on existing utility poles, or if they can build it into a street light, to do it into a street light. And there's above-ground utilities there. So those are the 2 locations. If I can make one other comment on this, and I'm not sure where to go with this, because we're not public health experts on the safety of this, but we've got lots of comments saying, questioning the safety of this. It appears, again, not an expert on this, but I'm trying to get better educated, and I've asked Crown Castle for more information to speak to the issue of, we don't feel it's safe to be near a house. And again, I haven't read up on this, and I don't know if myself or Eric Rufo or anyone else on staff would ever be an expert on radio waves and small cell technology, but it appears they've researched this fairly extensively as far as the safety and the proximity to people where these are located. But I've asked them, provide more information, if you can find independent reviews.
Studies and stuff,
studies
yeah.
of this to say, if you just tell us it's safe, well, then provide more information or documentation. So, you know, you all can feel more comfortable about this if, you know, we have someone saying, well, it's across the street from me, or it's, you know, a 500-foot radius, and I still think that's not safe or acceptable. And we may not be able to stop that anyways, but at least if we can be better educated on it, to speak to it, that was one thing, and I had a phone conversation with a representative Friday from Crown Castle asking for that information. And then the other thing is they're going to be reaching out to y'all to talk to you directly, and they're trying to move cautiously because they want to explain how they do this and the benefits, but then also not overstep their bounds as far as communication with, you know, mayor and council on this. And at some point, I thought they need to talk to the public a little more directly, you know, whether that's in a council meeting here or some other venue, to talk to, you know, all the whys and how this is done and safety of it, that kind of thing. So hopefully we can make this as, you know, palatable as we can for the public as it gets rolled out.
I'm just curious how much more is coming. I know this is probably the start.
More.
So,
More, yeah, I mean, how much?
Yeah,
I've asked, like Sheila had a request or question, and I asked it about, well, can you tell us what other ones are out there coming? And they
it goes from
said
11,
that
and next
they're
time.
handling this
50,
now, they're
then
not.
to 100. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't, you know, I'm not saying that they don't want to share it. They may not have actually mapped it out in other areas yet. Maybe they have, and it's just so preliminary, they don't want to go there yet with it. Oh, but it's not just us, it's going to be across the whole country.
What does this 008 and 009 mean? Do you
That's
have
the-
any idea?
Those are the
Current.
first two.
These are current?
With the plan
Yeah,
is
that
what
was
they're-
their
what we moved it here.
initial location of a small cell antenna.
And honestly,
Before we want to move
we'll
it.
probably have the potential to see more of these going forward. I mean, all communities are just
Yeah,
how we move forward in society, and this 5G technology is rolling out, and we all have these
Right.
cell phones in our pockets. So
yeah,
I would not be surprised if we continue to see this roll out more.
yeah.
But
So,
I agree, we need to get as much verified studies and stuff that when people start questioning, we've got something to give to them that is not somebody's opinion, it's an actual study that's been done, because no matter what you do here, when you go out on the internet, you're gonna find somebody that did a study that said it's killing people.
yeah. And that's, I mean, we all do it. We all Google to find information on something right away, and sometimes what we get is valid, and sometimes it's not. And sometimes, you know, you can get what you want to hear if you put the right search in. So it's just, it's a tough one to try and determine. I think they've vetted this enough with FCC guidelines and other things to know how to put this out there without being too close with the waves. But again, it would be nice to see more information to support or refute that, rather than, you know, a blanket statement that worrying about safety of it.
But like you said, we may not have any say anyway.
Yeah, and this is the other balance act on it.
We don't want to piss them off.
We're trying to work with them on it, and if we just say, go away, we don't like it, they can bring back up the
Original
yeah,
place.
the bill that says they have the authority to go into municipal right-of-ways, our town roads, and DOT roads, not just other areas. So,
I think at the very least, we should actually probably be grateful that they're working with us, because they could have just,
You know, at
done it.
this point,
Yeah.
and something can turn south tomorrow, they do appear to be putting a good amount of effort
Yeah.
in, more than I expected, to try and, because it's a bad PR thing for them
Yeah.
too. If this is rolled out poorly and they are strong-armed about this, you know, they're gonna have a lot of pushback that's gonna be really unpleasant for them.
Sure.
And so but, well, I don't know, so we have a conference call, it's just gonna be like a Zoom, I think, meeting or Teams meeting with some folks from Crown Castle later this week. So you want more details on the
Get
location and the safety?
Get whatever
and-
studies we
yeah.
can done, that we can get in safety, and we should have a whole bibliography either put on our webpage or ready to hand out to somebody when they start
Yeah.
questioning it.
And I started to ask for that Friday, I was asking for it.
And even if they're not the ones that have it,
Yeah.
go through your government, League of Government, whatever, and,
Yeah, the
you know,
yeah, League.
somebody must have made a collection of studies for this kind of stuff.
You guys think there's some kind of construction there on that corner or something? Is that what somebody said? I'm seeing Flow State Construction, but I'm pretty sure it's a residential house.
Yeah, I'm gonna write down and just see what the
But I-
utilities are.
It's not there's
There's a big
Yes.
open
It's like
area
a
on the side
utilities.
where there's utilities already.
It's like a
Above
small-
ground utilities.
Yeah, it might be one of those like three-phase utility poles for the power or something.
Utilities somewhere in there.
Well, I'd like to look at it and then just find out exactly where they're
Yeah.
gonna put
But
it.
it looks
because
like
if
it
they just
comes
push
straight to
across
the end
street
of
in somebody else's
Rutledge.
front yard, I don't
And
think
if
that's
that's
fair
the
either.
case, then
I
it'd be
mean,
right
they're-
there.
No, it's not Rutledge, it's just the entrance of Winter Forest, you're right.
All right, well, I'll,
Like you said,
anything we can get more
Missed it,
detailed,
missed
it's
it.
spot, and I don't know
It's right there.
how
Okay.
precise
Gotcha,
these
gotcha.
are either. These
Gotcha.
may be an
Okay.
approximation still.
Ground unit.
of the
Yeah, that'd be
precise.
I'm with Bob, I'd like to see if they
Yeah, it's
have any
much better than
safety
what we were looking at.
surveys about it or whatever
Right,
it is first.
right. I had a couple other things, so unless there's any other comments on that, I'll get to the others. I just had two other things. The contract discussions with Fletcher Fire and Rescue, Councilman Lance and Mayor have worked on the committee, put a lot of work into a lot of good suggested potential revisions, I'll say at this point, because it'll depend on the give and take with the fire board. But we met with them last week and went through these with a two-member committee from the fire board side and worked on an updated agreement that kind of includes these revisions. Again, they have not been vetted back on the fire board side, but we got that done. I emailed it to you today, and if y'all can take a look at that, and if you're generally comfortable, if there's something that particularly stands out, let us know, because the next step is to send this to the fire board and let them discuss this and see what they're comfortable not, or however much negotiation or back and forth may go on this. And I don't know if I'm leaving anything out, Mayor. or
No, I think you
Trevor, on
covered it.
that.
I was just gonna give kudos to Trevor. He really spearheaded this and did a good job.
I think we've
Oh,
worked on
thank
it
you.
well. No, we've worked on it well together.
Thank you
so-
both for
How
that
receptive
process.
were they when you went to them the first time? Were they
The first-
receptive to your initial,
That was, I guess that was the first time.
Yeah, we only met
Only
one
met
time.
oh, it's
Yeah.
only the one time?
Yeah.
I think they were generally receptive. I think they understood and agreed that the contract needed to be updated.
Yep. So, good job to our committee members, to Trevor and Preston on that. And so the last thing I wanted to mention, unless there's any other comments or questions on the fire contract update, the code enforcement on our One Oak Brook, our issue down on that property. The bidding ended on it, so that's good news. It ended at $268,019. I thought it would make it to $300,000, but maybe it's good it only went that high because it's gonna need a lot of work to rehab that house. The winning bidder was Carolina Legacy Investments, and they purchase and renovate or rehab homes and sell them, so I guess flip it. Eric Rufa has reached out to them, once Joe Farikas let us know this, that was a low bid, and that was who had the low bid. And he has communicated to them to and confirm that that's their intention to renovate and flip it. I've also asked Joe Farikas, our town attorney, to make sure this stays on the docket for where we're at in the code enforcement process. I mentioned to you kind of that next step was to get an order of abatement in court, which would allow us to go forcibly on the property and clean it up. I know the buyer is concerned about that because they don't want to lean on their, disrupt their ability to start. But in the event it doesn't close, or the closing takes forever, depends on, do we want to do this and spend the money to do it? It's not going to cost a fortune to go there and just at least remove the garbage from the property or the debris that's all over there.
They don't have a date for a closing yet?
Right now, we don't know the closing date on that. When Eric called them, they're working on that. They're trying to do something as quickly as possible, the buyer, for a closing. But you know how it is. You can get a closing, then it may you're looking at least a month's time. Usually you don't get them with more than faster than 30 days. And then if something happens, or it gets delayed, or there's, who knows?
Just some paperwork or.
Yeah, or the
liens that
title
pop up.
search, there's a
Yeah.
problem.
So legally, can the person continue to live in the house until closing?
They're on there as, I guess maybe the interpretation would be that this is our understanding, but I think we've got pretty good history of what's happening there. I think the son of the owner of record is the one who's on there, and associates, girlfriend, whatever it may be. They're on there thinking they've got the right to be on there because they've been allowed to live in the house. There's been nothing to force them off yet, I guess legally, since it went into this foreclosure process. I guess until that ends with this bidding
can stay
and
on
you
it
get a new
probably.
owner. So then at that point, and we've reached out to the new buyer, the low bid, to let them know whatever way the police department can help, that we'll work with them to basically remove trespassers on there. Because that's going to be a problem when they go in there and they
Oh,
start
yeah.
cleaning it up, is to remove.
I may be wrong, but it looked like a couple of days ago, looked like the front yard was starting to get cleaned up, and then I drove by it today, and it looked like it was a mess again.
It's like up and down, and to me, it looks worse than what it's been. I'm sharing this because I know it's been a real upset to the neighbors there, and they're looking for us to do everything we can. So that's the latest. That's all I had. Oh, and don't forget Mr. Davies'
Retirement.
event Wednesday at
It's not a
3.
memorial.
I'm going to call it a party. How about that? It is party. So we're looking forward to that. Not looking forward to you leaving, but looking forward to that.
The police department said that they pulled all the interior wiring out of that house and recycled it for money.
Cost a fortune to redo that.
Oh, my goodness.
So,
Yeah,
We have any other?
It's going to be a very
They were telling us that last
expensive
Friday.
remodel.
That's sad.
That's all I had there.
All right, any other business from council? All right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion. I second.
Bob made a motion, Travis seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? We are adjourned.
It's just hard to believe that if someone's not cooperative, that there's so
Hey,
little
how are
you
ya?
can do to force their hand.
Yeah.
Oh, do what? Oh,